Hi there, Sycamore Trails students and families. I'm Miss Geraci, and I am one of the third grade teachers here at Sycamore Trails. Today, I will continue to read Chapter 9 from The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. I am going to begin on page 146, and I will end on page 162. I hope you enjoy. I can't tell you how exciting this was for me. Even if the words and phrases sometimes confused me, the drawings were clear in my mind. It was like seeing an entirely new language composed of symbols for AC and DC, positive and negative, batteries and switches in a circuit, and various arrows showing the direction of current. Right away, I understood this language clearly, as if my brain had known it all along. About a month later, school ended for the semester, and Gilbert had more time to hang out. One morning, we went to the library, but as soon as we arrived, Miss Sicamore hurried us to leave. "You boys spend hours in here taking my time," she said, "but today I have an appointment. Just find something quickly." The reason it always took so long was because the books were in disarray. They weren't shelved alphabetically or by subject, which meant we had to scan every title to find something we liked. That day, as Gilbert and I looked for something good, I remembered an English word that had stumped me in one of my other books. "Gilbert, what does the word grapes mean?" He said. "Never heard it before. Let's look it up in the dictionary." The English Chippewa dictionaries were kept at the bottom shelf. I'd always used one on Miss Sicelo's desk, but given her mood, I didn't dare ask her for it. I squatted down to grab another dictionary, and when I did, I noticed a book I'd never seen. It was pushed deep into the shelf and slightly hidden. "What's this?" I wondered. Pulling it out, I saw it was a textbook from America called Using Energy. And this book has since changed my life. The cover featured a long row of windmills, though at the time I had no idea what a windmill was. All I saw were tall white towers with three blades spinning like fans. "Gilbert," I said, calling him over, "don't these look like the pinwheels that you, me, and Jeffrey used to make? We used to find old plastic water bottles in the trading center. We'd cut the sides into blades like a fan, drive a nail through the lid, and then hang it on a stick. The wind would spin the blades. A kid's toy." "Yeah," he said, "you're right. But these things are giant. What are they for?" Let's find out. "Energy is all around you every day," the book said. "Sometimes energy needs to be converted to another form before it is useful to us. How can we convert forms of energy? Read on and you'll see." I read on. "Imagine that hostile forces have invaded your town and defeat seems certain. If you needed a hero to save the day, it's likely you would go to the nearest university and drag a scientist to the battlefront. Yet, according to legend, it was not a general who saved the Greek city of Syracuse when the Roman fleet attacked it in 214 BC. It explained how Archimedes used his death ray, which was really a lot of mirrors, to reflect the sun onto the enemy's ships until, one by one, they caught fire and sank. That was an example of how you can use the sun to produce energy. Just like with the sun, windmills could also be used to generate power. People throughout Europe and the Middle East used windmills for pumping water and grinding grain, it said. When many wind machines are grouped together on wind farms, they can generate as much electricity as a power plant. It all snapped together. I turned to Gilbert to see if he was reading the same stuff. "If the wind spins the blades of a windmill," I said, "and the dynamo works by turning the pedals, these two things could work together." I remembered what the book had said about the dynamo. The movement energy is provided by the rider. Gilbert, the rider is the wind. If I could somehow get the wind to spin the blades on a windmill and rotate the magnets in a dynamo, I could create electricity. And if I attached a wire to the dynamo, I could power anything, especially a light bulb. All I needed was a windmill and I could have lights. No more smoky lanterns that left us with sore throats and hacking coughs. With a windmill, I could stay awake and read instead of going to bed at 7 with the rest of Malawi. But most important, a windmill could also pump water. With most of Malawi still reeling from famine, a water pump could do wonders. At home, we had a small shallow well that my mother used for cleaning. The only way to get that water was by bucket and rope. But if I attached a windmill and pump to that well, I could pipe water into our fields. My God, I thought, we could harvest 2 times per year. While the rest of Malawi went hungry during December and January, we'd be picking our second crop of maize. The pump could also allow my mother a year-round garden to grow things like potatoes, mustard greens, and soybeans, both to eat and sell at the market. I began to get excited. No more skipping breakfast, Gilbert. No more dropping out of school. With a windmill, we'd finally release ourselves from the troubles of darkness and hunger. A windmill meant more than just power. It was freedom. Gilbert, I'm going to build a windmill. I'd never tried anything like it before, but I knew that if someone else could build them in Europe and America, then I could build one in Malawi. Gilbert smiled. When do we start? We start today. In my mind, I could picture the windmill I wanted to build, but before I attempted something so big, I wanted to experiment with a smaller model. I'd still need the same materials, blades, a shaft, and rotor, wire, and something like a dynamo or small motor to generate electricity from the moving blades. Now, students, if you are reading and following along with me, you will notice that now we are at a section in the book that contains several pictures that go along with the story. If you wanted to pause the video for a moment and look through the pictures, you can. Otherwise, you can meet me at page 151, and you can always go back and look at the pictures. Jeffrey and I used regular size water bottles for our pinwheels, but now I needed something stronger. Back at home, I started looking around and spotted just the thing. It was an empty jar of body care lotion that my sisters used to play cricket. It was plastic and shaped like a tub of margarine with a screw lid top. Perfect! Leaving the lid intact, I removed the bottom with a bow saw, then cut the sides into 4 strips and fanned them out like blades. I poked a hole through the center of the lid and nailed it to the bamboo wire, which I drove into the ground behind the kitchen. Right away, I realized the blades were too short to catch the wind. I needed to make them longer. In our village, we used our baths in a tiny hut made from grass that was open at the top. We typically installed plastic PVC pipe under the floors to keep them from flooding. Not long before, my Aunt Chrissy's bathhouse had collapsed in a storm, so they built a new one right beside it. The old one was still there, however, and I knew there must be some pipe buried beneath the rubble. After 20 minutes of digging around, I managed to pull it free. I sawed off a long section, then cut it down the middle from top to bottom. Back in my mother's kitchen, I stoked the fire until the coals were red, then held the pipe aloft over the heat. The plastic began to warp and blacken as it melted. Soon it was soft and easy to bend like wet banana leaves. Before it could cool down and harden, I laid it on the ground and pressed it flat with an iron sheet. Using the saw, I then carved 4 blades, each one measuring 20 centimeters in length. Once again, I didn't have the right kind of tools, so I had to improvise. This time, I needed a drill. Looking around my room, I found a long nail and took it to the kitchen. First, I drove the tip through a maize cob to create a handle, then placed the nail on the coals. Once it glowed hot, I poked holes in both sets of plastic blades. I used some wire to connect them to the bottle, but I didn't have any pliers to twist it tight. Instead, I used 2 bicycle spokes. That's when my mother found me. "What are you doing messing up my kitchen?" she said. If there was one thing she hated, it was kids messing up her kitchen. "Get these toys out of here." I tried to explain about the windmill and my plan to generate power, but all she saw was some mangled pieces of plastic and a bamboo stick. "Even little children play with more sensible things," she said. "Go help your father in the fields." "But I'm building something." "Something what?" "Something for the future." "I'll tell you something about the future," she said, and scooted me out the door. It was pointless to try to explain. What I needed now was a bicycle dynamo or motor, and I had no idea where I would find one. Of course, I knew where I could buy one. A shoekeeper named Dodd had one for sale at his hardware store in the trading center. I'd seen it on the shelves in the months before the famine, wrapped in plastic, so shiny and so out of reach. I went back this time, and sure enough, it was still there. Dodd smiled when I approached, so I tried my charm. "Fine day, Mr. Dodd," I said. "Yes, fine day. Your family?" "Oh, fine, fine, thanks for asking." "Say, how much for that dynamo behind you?" "500. I leaned forward and gave him the sorriest look I could muster. "Yes, but you see, Mr. Dodd, I don't have 500. He laughed. "Eh, you know how it works. Go find the money and come back. It will be here, and if not, I can always order another. I could get the money doing Ganyu work, maybe some odd jobs here and there. In fact, I'd heard that guys were making 100 kwacha a day unloading trucks at the dry goods store. If I worked a week, I could make enough money." I headed right over to the store and was the first one there. I'll get hired for sure, I thought. I waited and waited. Morning became afternoon. The sun grew dreadful, and I'd forgotten my water. Finally, the owner walked out. "Why do you keep standing here?" he asked. "I'm waiting for the trucks." "They come every day," he said, "except Monday." Just my luck. It was Monday. That night at home, I hit upon another idea. The bicycle dynamo was the ideal motor for the larger windmill I wanted to make. But for this test model, I could get by with using a much smaller generator. I knew where to find it. I walked over to Jeffrey's house and found him in his room. "Hey, Bambo, do you remember where we put the international radio and cassette player?" "Yeah, it's here someplace. Why?" "I want to use its motor to generate electricity." "Electricity?" "Yeah, from a windmill." Every time Gilbert and I had visited the library, Jeffrey said he was too busy working his fields. To be honest, he didn't seem that interested anyway. "We're headed to the library," we'd say. "Want to come?" "Go ahead," he'd answer. "Waste your time." But now, when I told him my idea of building a windmill that would produce power, and then showing him what I'd built so far, he saw things differently. "Cool! Where did you get such an idea?" "The library." Jeffrey found the international cassette player under his bed, and I went to work. My screwdriver, in this case, was really a bicycle spoke that I'd hammered flat against the stone. It wasn't anything pretty, but it worked to remove the screws from the radio's casing to allow me inside. After a little prying and jiggling, I removed the cassette desk and found the motor. It was half as long as my index finger and shaped like a AAA battery. A short piece of metal stuck out from the top like a stem. Attached was a small copper wheel that spun the magnets inside and gave the radio its energy. Using some wire, I attached the motor to the windmill. My idea was to have the body care lid turn the copper wheel as it was spinning, like two gears in motion. But when I spun the lid, it just slipped against the copper. I needed some friction to make the gears catch. What we need is some rubber, I told Jeffrey. Yeah, but where do we get it? I don't know. What about from a pair of shoes? Now you're thinking. The rubber from our flip-flops was too spongy and not durable enough. Otherwise, we'd be set. Everyone in Malawi wore flip-flops. We needed a special kind of rubber, the kind used to make flats worn by women in Wimby. There was only one problem. A company called Shore Rubber was going through the villages collecting old shoes to recycle and make new ones. They were offering a half-kilo of salt for each pair. So, of course, most women took the deal. I wondered if it was even possible to find used shoes anymore. But it was worth a try. All day, Jeffrey and I dug through garbage piles all over Masitala and Wimby looking for these shoes. Finally, after shifting through mounds of peanut shells, banana peels, and old rusty cans, Jeffrey held up a shoe. One shoe. Tonga! The black flat had been buried so long it was now gray and filled with crusty muck. It smelled like goat skin. Good job, chap, I said. Using my knife, I carefully carved an O-shaped piece out of the rubber, small enough to slide over the motor's copper wheel like a cap. This took more than an hour to do, but once I pressed it on, the two gears caught just right. The next step was to test the motor to see if it produced current. Jeffrey began spinning the blades by hand, and I took the motor's two wires and touched them to my tongue. Feel anything? He asked. Yeah, tickles. Good, then it works. Now the question was, what should we power using this little windmill? We decided it would be Jeffrey's favorite radio, an old Panasonic that he listened to while he worked in the fields. Jeffrey loved his Billy cont'd music, and sometimes I'd even sneak up on him in the maize rows and catch him dancing. I held the windmill while Jeffrey popped off the Panasonic's battery cover and removed the cells. Using my knowledge from the books, I assumed that because the radio operated on batteries, its motor produced DC power, which meant we could connect the wires straight to the radio's positive and negative terminals. Jeffrey pushed the wires inside, then twisted them so they connected to the heads. What do we do now? He asked. Now we wait for the wind to turn the blades. Just as I was saying that, the wind began to blow. My blades started to spin and the wheel began to turn. The radio popped and whistled, and suddenly there was music. It was my favorite group, the Black Missionaries on Radio 2, singing their great song. We are chosen just like Moses. I jumped so high I nearly disconnected the wires. You hear that? I screamed. We did it. It actually works. At last, Jeffrey said. Now I'll go even bigger. Superpower. The success of my small windmill gave me confidence to attempt an even bigger machine, and I'd already started making a list of materials. I would still use PVC pipe for blades, though I'd need much longer pieces. The blades would have to attach to a motor, which needed to be some kind of flat metal disc. Plus, I'd need a shaft or axle to make it all spin. The best thing I could think of was the bottom bracket of a bicycle. The bracket, or gave as we called it, is what attached the bike pedals to the crankset and turns the chain to spin the back wheel. But in this case, I'd replace the pedals with blades. When the back wheel spun, I'd have a dynamo attached to generate the power. Basically, I was going to hoist a bicycle into the air like a flag to catch the wind. Just trying to imagine it made me laugh. But of course, none of this changed the fact that I still had no money to buy materials. So like with the smaller machine, I had to go and find them on my own. For the next month, I woke up early and went searching for the windmill pieces like I was exploring for treasure. The place I knew was an old tobacco plantation across from Cachacolo School. The abandoned garage and scrapyard were littered with machine parts and stripped bodies of cars and tractors, all forgotten and left to rust. Gilbert and I used to play around there, but never had much use for the junk. Now I was returning to the yard with a mission. I set out one morning over the hills and streams, noticing how the land hadn't changed much since the end of the rains. The grass was still high and starting to fade to brown, but the maize in the fields was tall and green. Soon we'd be harvesting and our problems would be over, at least for this year. At the school, I turned into the plantation and stopped at the entrance to the scrapyard. Behold! Now that I had an actual purpose and a plan, I realized just how much treasure lay before me. Old water pumps, tractor rims half the size of my body, filters, hoses, old pipes, and plows. Several stripped car bodies lay bleached in the sun in addition to 2 abandoned tractors. They had no tires or engines, just rusted gearboxes in their bellies. Inside the cabs, the glass was busted off the instrument panels, but the steering wheels, clutch, and pedals were still intact. Aside from the sound of the grass swaying in the wind, the scrapyard was silent, and I was beautifully alone. The first afternoon, I discovered a large tractor fan, the perfect design for my motor. I could bolt the PVC pipes directly to the metal blades on the fan. That same day, I found a giant shock absorber, which I banged against an engine block to knock off the casing. Inside was a long piston, the ideal windmill shaft. I needed some kind of ball bearing to connect the shock absorber and gave to reduce the friction. In order to find the right size, I used a piece of rope as a measuring tape and went around to all the various shafts with bearings attached. After 3 days, I found the right match on an old peanut grinding machine. I used a rusted coil spring to bang the bearings loose and found it within pristine condition. The only problem was the scrapyard that it sat directly across from Cachacolo School, where I'd left a bit of my heart. The school was currently empty until students returned in a few short weeks. I could see through the windows. For a brief moment, I imagined myself back at my desk. "Look out," I said. "Your man, Kim Kawamba, will be there soon." All right, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed reading with me today.